Ladies and gentlemen, get the book Dr. Joshua Bowen wrote, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. It is extremely full of knowledge and information for anyone, as well as join the Patreon. There's hundreds of videos that have been not released to the internet. You can ask questions and I will record them with these scholars in high definition. I do that all the time. You can also personal message me and you help the community grow. Thanks a lot. Dr. Joshua Bowen. Michael Baca has another question. Michael, just send the check. I'll give you my address. I'm just kidding. Okay, Derek, you tempted me with another question for Dr. Bowen. What is the basic relationship between Elohim and Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible? Why didn't the biblical authors just settle for one name? We kind of touched on this earlier, but for the deity, how does Yahweh relate to or have characteristics that are similar or different to other Near Eastern deities like Bel, Asur, Marduk, etc.? As well as Egyptian deities like Seth and Osiris. Ooh, we're getting outside of your wheelhouse, but we'll go in your wheelhouse. You might have a scholar in mind that you think would be interesting, but as well as Egyptian deities like Seth and Osiris. Are Yahweh's characteristics basically derived from the common stock of the Near East, or are there particular differences? Again, thanks to you, Derek and Dr. Bowen, for your insights.
Yeah, incredibly complex question. And one that I don't know that we can really hammer down. So probably the person I've already forgotten their name, the guy that asked the question, but
Michael Baca.
Michael probably wants to read, and of course I can't find it as I'm looking, but Ted Lewis's book on the origin and character of God. It's that 1,000-page. But it was recently published, like 2020, I think is when it came out. And of course, I know Ted Lewis. He taught me up at Hopkins, but it's on ancient Israelite religion. That's what the whole book's about. So he basically goes through, I'm going to just grab it because I think I know. I think it's over here.
Let's see. Let's follow Dr. Josh here.
I thought it was over here. I must have moved it. Maybe it's... Yeah, there it is. Okay. Okay. So just so kind of have an idea of, and again, it's the origin and character of God, if you can see that.
Yeah.
But it's like his magnum opus.
Ooh.
So, just to read some of the chapter titles: El worship, the iconography of divinity; El, the origin of Yahweh. The iconography of divinity Yahweh, the characterization of the deity Yahweh, the characterization, I said that, the deity Yahweh. So basically what it's doing is it's walking through all the evidence that we have, of Yahweh. Where does he come from? What are his characteristics from many different angles? What do we know about El? The different names of God. There's a whole section on El Shaddai, El Elyon, all the El compound names. Highly complex is the answer, but I think that's a great resource to use to try to. And it's not like it's a real dense, difficult read. I enjoyed going through it. Okay, so does Yahweh? How does he compare to Elohim? And why don't they use just one name? Well, they're different sources, right? These are different traditions that are being brought together. So one source is using Elohim, one source is using Yahweh. Not always in every case, but with some consistency. The Hebrew Bible, I think, maybe not the more interesting question, but a question maybe that's in this vein is, what's the relationship between El and Yahweh? And I think in the Hebrew Bible, they're trying to syncretize them. They're trying to make them the same deity. But I think there are signs in the text that indicate that originally this was not the case, right? There's the need to syncretize them.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, just throwing this out there, like not using El and Yahweh, but El Shaddai, when that clear passage, your fathers have known me as, but now you'll know me as.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is what they're kind of what they're trying to do is bring about this moving toward this type of monotheism, or at least henotheism.
Right.
So when you think, though, about El and Yahweh, you see it in other passages where, like Numbers 23 and 24, for example, with the Balaam oracles, you can see Elyon and Yahweh, and I think El, all as distinct entities. And again, this sort of betrays, I think, what represents older Israelite religion, and that later, writers and editors are trying to sort of work out of the system. And so things, the problem is that even basic questions like, where does Yahweh come from? What's his origin? We don't know. Probably comes from the south, but that there's some evidence that it's not just from the south. And again, he goes through that in his book, and people like Mark Smith have talked about this sort of thing. And the other thing, I guess, to think about, that I think part of the question was, what's he like? What are his characteristics like? Is he just sort of being pulled from other ancient Near Eastern deities? Well, deities will often have similar characteristics, right? So Yahweh's a warrior god. It's a warrior deity. So you can look at places like Exodus 15 and the Song of the Sea. And Yahweh is, the warrior deity that casts Pharaoh and his army into the sea. And it's a victory. These are victory songs, Song of the Sea and the Song of Miriam. So again, that's an aspect that I think is highlighted in certain sections of the text, but yet the biblical authors are trying to do things to tease out different characteristics. So it's not so. I don't think it has to be a lot more nuanced. He's not just. I don't think he's just an amalgamation or something. I don't think they're thinking of one or two or three other deities and then creating Yahweh or something. This is probably a real deity that was worshipped, and maybe that was brought by pastoral nomads that moved into Israel, that moved into the land and sort of joined up with Israel, or maybe they were people that were even in Egypt. I wouldn't be surprised if there were like people that were in Egypt, and when they came up, they brought Yahweh worship with them, and that sort of became a nationalistic thing. I don't know, but I mean, these are like, we don't know. We don't know.
I think that's interesting the way you just phrased that. I mean, like, there's different ways to postulate the idea that it's possible. I mean, like we talk about Marduk. Marduk's attached to a particular place that became kind of successful. And if we apply what you said to a group of like slaves or nomads that are like insignificant, and they somehow feel significant in light of a situation, that might be the tradition that gets handed down. And those priests, if I could use the term at the time, or the scribes, however you want to put it, at the time, they kind of like set the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Once the ball's rolling, you're not going to go back and go, okay. I mean, you could, but it's like saying the canon of the New Testament. Many early Christians read a lot of these pseudepigraphical writings of Jesus as an infant, things like that. They eventually they said, okay, these are what we're going to stick with. And someone finally said, all right, here's our tradition. Here's what we're going to stick with. It's probably a horrible example, but my point is this God becomes the one that kind of elevates to that status, and then becomes the God that they worship. And it becomes the thing.
And I mean, you can see this just, I'm not saying that this is what happened or anything, but I mean, I think Ronald Hendel talks about this sort of thing, or you could have, like the formation of Israel as a people, and we're sort of going off a little bit.
It's cool.
But I mean, it sort of ties in. The formation of the nation, it doesn't have to be this monolithic thing, like one thing caused it. So you don't have to say, all right, it has to be completely an indigenous group of people that are all the people that were ended up Israelite were already in the land. It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be everybody was outside and they came in across the Jordan River and conquered. It doesn't have to be that. They were all slaves down in Egypt and they all came up. It doesn't have to be that. You can have, like, I think probably if just seeing the evidence that I've seen, and again, not my area of expertise, but I suspect probably what the case will be is that most of what became Israel that we see in like the Maranatha Stela, these are Canaanites that are living in the land, probably living closer to the coast, right? When you have the sea peoples that come in, of course they take over the coast, at least the Philistines do, and they come into conflict with this people that flee, whatever, migrate, whatever you want to call it, up into the highlands. And of course we see this archaeologically, that the highlands populates. But that doesn't mean, I can very easily be convinced, if we saw some evidence of this, for example, that, a small handful, even like 5, 10, I don't know, let's say 5 or 10 people escape from Egypt. They were Semitic slaves down in Egypt, and because of the waning power of Egypt over Canaan and down in Egypt, particularly following the sea peoples, that they escape and they're worshiping Yahweh down in the south. They come up and they find their way into Canaan, see the tension, and they make their way up into the highlands because they're, a disenfranchised people. And they come up into the highlands and they say, wow, our God brought us out of Egypt. Our God is Yahweh. And, the people that are in the highlands identify because, we've been Canaanites that have been under the boot, essentially, of Egypt, and that's our deity too, and they syncretize with their deity, Ael, whatever. And after some time, this becomes the national story, that the 5 or 10 people that came up that talked about their specific escape from slavery in Egypt gets sort of amalgamated with the general slavery that the people up in Canaan felt. So they were all slaves in Egypt. And then over time, this story develops into this nationalistic, everybody was a slave down in Egypt.
Right. That's the hard part, is peeling back the onion of legend and finding out what maybe the source is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.